Hey guys, hope you're well. Hello from beautiful, albeit gray, Copenhagen, Denmark. I have one more day here until I fly home, so I'm going to wait a little while to release a recording. So most people are up when it's actually released. But if you appreciate the work and you saw me out here protesting in Denmark, I do have my donation links as well as a new one, Buy Me a Coffee. So some international supporters were wondering how they could help out because they couldn't donate with the other methodology. So hopefully that works. That's all there. But obviously wanted to talk about two interesting topics. And I suppose we'll start with the reason why a lot of you clicked on this video in the first place. But I also want to go over the my feelings of protesting in Denmark, what it says about the general direction of the movement, what it says about the strength of the movement. So I think that's kind of the main point of the video, but of course a lot of you are curious about what my initial response is about Zero Dark Tony labeling me a domestic terrorist, which is an inaccurate description because if I'm international, I don't know how you describe it, domestic terrorist. But apparently ZDT has made, I've heard nothing from the Danish police, nor will I, but apparently ZDT has made a call saying that me, a domestic terrorist, because I told Aaron Smith 11 where ZDT and his mom were exiting from the courtroom. I didn't do anything else. That was the extent of it. But because of that, I'm a domestic terrorist under investigation for hate crimes. And, you know, it's hard for me to take it seriously or for me to be worried because I'd imagine, like, he makes this phone call to the Danish police, and then they hear from this guy, and he immediately starts rambling, hey, just so you know, there's a domestic terrorist here, he's under investigation for hate. And then I think their first thought is, oh, that's what it's like to be on fentanyl. This fentanyl that is emerging in the U.S., we finally got a caller who exhibits those symptoms. So to them, it might have been kind of fun and interesting because obviously what they feel is they're listening to somebody who's clearly cracked out on his mind on drugs, quite frankly. So, you know, the only lament that I have is I didn't get to witness that phone call when they remarked that a classic, very quintessential American hardcore hard drug addicts, what they sound like and what the feeling is. So I could only imagine that that's the initial reaction, especially if they got into any of the details. But am I worried about it? No. A lot of people saying, do I have grounds to sue? Probably in some regard. I don't think anything real or tangible is going to come from it. I doubt ZDT even made a phone call, but he certainly issued directives to have others make phone calls. I don't know if they did or not that it matters, but technically I would have grounds to sue. But moreover, I don't think it's worth it. But moreover, I will kind of put this in my pocket for future trials, future proceedings that certainly show a pattern of harassment with ZDT that I could certainly add into evidence, whether Vanessa's thinking about getting an RO, or Nora, or Mindy, or anybody else. That tangible evidence, the video, thank you to the Hero Not Zero Reddit, that video has been clipped and can be used as evidence to display a pattern of general harassment and could kind of speak to his character and the legitimacy of why this restraining order is important. You can see the damage that he causes. For me, it's not that much damage. It's hilarious to me. I kind of enjoy it. Maybe I'm a glutton for punishment. And well, it is good because the scariest moment is when I was respectful to ZDT and ZDT in his chat started complimenting me and said I was a good journalist, that there was hope, and boy, did I feel violated. I did not consent whatsoever with ZDT being up my ass. So everything's back to normal, so that's good. That's how funny and kind of fickle. Nothing is really real, right? How do you judge a journalist? You can say they're great one moment, but immediately if they're not in your right camp, then they start finding, you know, examples of how you're a terrible journalist. So I'll just keep on chugging along. But that was nice. So at least he's no longer, because that was very upsetting to have him compliment me. I do not want that happening, and I did not consent. So that's kind of the rub on that. We have a ZDT, I think, has his next hearing on March 28th, of which I'll be there for. So that should be an interesting situation. My assumption is he'll get a continuance. That's my guess. Did he do anything legal with me to violate any RO with anybody else or criminal charges? Obviously not. But again, this is not the first of ZDT's trials. There's going to be a lot kind of more down the road. So, he's like a kind of a cartoon character, pretty hilarious to me. But I'm not too perturbed, nor do I, you can take seriously his threats that he might actually take action with stuff, but everybody will just laugh him out of the room. So, to me, it doesn't really affect me. And then, of course, the reason I went out here, this international, or this domestic terrorist, the reason this domestic terrorist in Stalker Dodge, and I think somebody else called me a bottom-feeding tabloid reporter, the reason that I showed up is because I wanted to highlight, there's some conversation that the protest movement is dead because you only focus on one specific city. And you kind of feel like, okay, if it's dead in that city, that's kind of representative of everywhere else. So one of the reasons that I decided to show up, even though I have a small amount of subscribers, even 10,000 is enough to at least increase awareness for a few more people, that there's some really hardcore, dedicated protesters of Scientology. I had such a privilege of meeting L. Ron Hubcult, who has a fascinating story with Aaron before, he decided to randomly have choice words for many of them, but I enjoyed his interview with Aaron, SBTV chef as well, and Miriam, of course. Pleasure to meet Kirby's mom, who has been a big supporter of mine, and many other people. So it's great to kind of meet them all in the flesh, and they have really compelling stories. And just goes to show, a really nice turnout. It was probably, I want to say about 15 ultimately, and a lot of people stopping on the street. And the protest was successful because Scientology had to completely reroute and rewire where we were protesting largely at the building where the Sea Org members took classes, and they had to completely reroute and rewire where everybody went. And they even added these barricades and had this guy window washing, so they had an excuse to sort of block the entrance. And the chief spokesperson in the entire Scientology Europe. Remember, guys, Denmark is sort of ground zero, is sort of the main hub for all Scientology activities in Europe. It's not even England that's the most significant. It's not Great Britain. It's actually Denmark. So there's so much significance here. And coming to Denmark specifically is quite important because of the outside influence they have here across the pond. And the main spokeswoman for Europe showed up. I tried to get an interview. She wouldn't answer. And then I said, well, I could just talk, because she was pointing her phone camera at me, and then she put it away, unfortunately. But did my best to do that. And there was some real press. Speaking of actual interview, you could debate till the cows come home if I'm a real journalist, but there was a gentleman who worked for one of Sweden's most popular magazine, who interviewed Miriam, talked with me for a moment or two, talked with a lot of other people, and got their stories. So this is going to have some really significant, important press. And that's kind of the goal. It's hard when you're only in LA, and the LA Times, which has been so kind of hit or miss to connect with, is kind of your only source to provide media. But again, media, this type of mainstream media, creates awareness and allows even more people to see the dangers of Scientology, because that's kind of the main goal, right? Is educating that there's a general perception that Scientologists are wacky. A lot of people know about Xenu, but they don't know that they're under investigation for child labor trafficking. They don't know that they're liable quite obviously for child sex abuse cover-up. They don't know that that they've been confiscating passports and falsely promising immigrants a visa to stay here, and then confiscating their passports, or they actually don't have that visa. There's a myriad, when it's more than just a silly, fun, kooky cult that's kind of funny to observe. They're creating blatant human rights violations and blatant illegality. So that's kind of the point, is to really, and Miriam was kind of the main person in Denmark, was really successful in kind of letting people know the true realities and the true human cost of what Scientology has been doing. So, it's twofold. It's like, what should be the ultimate goal of the protest? Creating, many people think, well, getting specific people who are still in Scientology out of Scientology might be the main point. That's going to be the hardest thing to do. I think the main point is really just creating more and more awareness possible, that the more you get, the more people realize that they're not just the silly cult, but that they're a very tangible danger. So I think in every sense of the word, that was very successful. So I'm very glad I went. Well worth going, and a lot of people wanted me to go, which I'm very complimented by. And I'll certainly, I'm looking into going to Puerto Rico for the Ideal Org opening in May, and then another big event, perhaps in London in October. So I'll certainly be busy with a lot of that. But it's interesting to see what do these protests actually cause. And usually there's a lot of activities outside of the Sea Org building. This time there was not. And so, it's entirely possible a lot of people weren't recruited successfully that might have been necessarily before because of our protesting. And again, for them to have to spend all this money on constructions, on the barricades, on the window cleaner, and to completely reroute them, if nothing else, they expended a lot of resources and a lot of funds just because of this thorn in their side. And this was sort of an average day. That was interesting. The protest was particularly interesting because aside from LA, the Chicago protest, there was this big moment, this big specific event. But Scientology, this is another successful reason. Scientology was thinking about doing this, maybe they celebrate it internally, but we're thinking about having an even bigger L. Ron Hubbard celebration. And because of the word of the protest, I don't think they had anything significant that they could invite anybody to. So in that sense, it was quite an accomplishment as well. So yeah, it was interesting to see. It was interesting to see that, speaking of, because it was a low-key day, the different style. And I do think like maybe the laws are a little more stringent here. You could get in trouble for quite a bit more, ironically, even though it's Europe. Miriam, for example, got a restraining order from that spokesperson in Scientology. It was successfully dropped. Even without a court case, the police just dropped it. So that's a very good thing. But it's easier to get that restraining order. So it does make you kind of wonder. There's opportunities where it should be encouraged. You saw me in Chicago, if you saw it in Chicago, where I was kind of screaming at the top of my lungs. And my main intent was to sort of drown out David Miscavige. So it was very loud. And in Chicago, people were a lot more aggressive. Denmark, it was a lot more low-key. Now, of course, that's because there wasn't also this major event. It does make me wonder, like, maybe creating that awareness. We're handing out very specific cards of a website, F-Sciento. That's kind of the new SBTV space that is kind of, that automatically has the key points of information that you should know about Scientology. So a lot of people were accepting those cards. And people the protesters, we were all kind of pretty low-key, non-confrontational, but at the same time, we were successful. So I really do think Miriam, along with SBTV Chef, along with L. Ron Hubcall, and everybody protesting, really could kind of shine a great example as to how you can do it effectively. Not that the aggression is necessarily wrong, but you can see all the ROs that people have gotten, the conflated charges. DOA shouldn't have gotten any charges, but his actions at least created that spark where that would get thrown out too, but you'd look at it very minor misdemeanor, and then Scientology takes the ball and run with it. So you don't want to give them a lot of balls where they could run with it and blow it over, where it's far more serious than it should be, than it legally should be, that anybody would expect. But the end result is something very serious and consequential. So this is also, kind of advice for people's own self-protection. Not that I'm going to tell anybody how to protest, and the aggression is still a good thing in a lot of ways, and keep doing that if you'd like. But this goes to show that the non-aggression can be incredibly successful as well. And Miriam has been out this for a multitude of months. Even though she was low-key, the spokesperson still found it necessary to get a restraining order. So you could see that if you're going to go through all that effort to get a restraining order against the protesters here in Denmark, and you saw how they protested, quiet, no shouting, low-key, blasted a little bit of music, blasted Lara's great tracks, but nothing that really drowned anything out. But you could see that Scientology was still going through the legal process to get rid of her. So if they're trying to get rid of her, that means, guess what? She's effective, and you can be effective being low-key and essentially just standing there, handing out cards, handing out information, and just kind of following wherever they go and ruining their day. That's very successful. So, I hope another reason I wanted to broadcast this is because the movement is clearly not dead. Just because it's not as active in one city, although shout out to Jacob Harkey, who was recently back at Big Blue, and I know a number of others are, so that's not even dead itself. But it just goes to show, you look at Australia, per Scientology audit, for example, is doing great work. Alex Barnes-Ross in Great Britain is doing great work as well. So you can see that internationally and nationally, Kansas City Scientology audit. I had the privilege of protesting with him when I visited Kansas City. He's doing great work, and now he's kind of manning the booth of the F-Scientology space. He's been incredibly effective in really being a thorn in the side of the Kansas City Scientology org. It was really a privilege to get to know him for the day that I did when I visited Kansas City. So you see all these people, and I guess for me, another reason why I said I didn't want to go live much, and I think, I'll go live and talk about CDT, maybe talk about the DOA versus Aaron stuff, but let's try to focus on all, aside from the DOA Aaron battle, let's, maybe we should focus on the people that are currently protesting and give more of a spotlight on them. And you could have your opinions about either one of them, and that's a whole totally different topic. But there are people who are currently protesting, who are currently doing amazing work, and I think that's something that we should promote and we should applaud, and we should kind of get out there in the ether and kind of maybe try to steer the conversation towards the actual good work that is being done against this cult, because contrary to some of the Reddit belief, that is far from gone. That is alive and well, and that's one of the reasons I want to show up here. So I hope you found the lives to be fruitful. I'll be going out with Miriam later to tour some buildings, so that I might even post this after we tour the buildings. But I'm really inspired. I'm really inspired to meet all the people that I got to meet. Very, very humbled that they thought it was significant that I showed up, and just a schmuck with 10,000 subscribers, but that was very sweet, and Kirby's mom especially, shout out again. But it really touched me, and I really saw some hardcore activists, some people who had some painful past, some painful stories, who were Sea Org members, who, despite the way that they might get re-traumatized, are kind of here to take down this cult. And there are so many stories like that. That should be kind of the message overall. So it was my privilege, and I kind of feel like I'm a man amongst gods. Some really amazing people I got to know. So thank you guys for watching, and thanks for all your support. You take care, and I'll see you back in LA. Bye-bye.